This is my weekly compendium ending Monday, April 17th, 2023. Case file number 1055, written by Bread Lucky, the scary glitch tale of the time warp gas station. I experienced this glitch a few months back. This is a relatively short story, but still creeps me out to this day because of how certain I am of it. On to the story. So I was working in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in a travel job where I would stay in hotels throughout the week and then travel home for the weekend. I got off at 5 per usual, and before I got on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, I stopped at a mom and pop style gas station to fuel up for the trip home. Got my gas, went in, paid for it, and headed for the Turnpike. I drove for maybe 2.5 hours before I decided I was going to pull off and get a quick bite and use the bathroom. I punched in my GPS the nearest gas station and headed to it. And I swear to God, I pulled into the exact same mom and pop gas station. I walked in to get a burger and almost fell over. I was so freaked out. Finished up in the station, walked out to the truck, and my GPS reflected I was in the same spot as 2.5 hours ago. Those 2.5 hours of driving completely erased as it was after 7. I should have been halfway home. The only logic I have is that I fell asleep at the station, but surely someone would have woken me up if I was there that long. I remember the drive and the gas in my truck reflected I had been driving. It's my only glitch and it still baffles me. Would you like even more content? Here's my Patreon. Now onto the stories. Case file number 1056, written by Senior Weather 3997. Is this a sign from the universe in a crystal miracle? 2 weeks ago, just after lunchtime, I went into my bedroom ensuite to go to the bathroom. When I came out of the bathroom, on the bedroom floor was an object that I did not recognize. In fact, it was so unfamiliar to me that I kind of nudged it with my foot to see if it was hard or soft or what. After tapping it with my foot, I realized that it was a crystal, quartz amethyst, I think. Now, it's only my wife and our 20-something daughter who live in our house, and no one has crystals or is into crystals. So I picked it up and rinsed it off with cool water, but didn't tell anyone about it for a couple of hours. When no one mentioned it, I said something to my wife and she knew nothing of it, as expected. Later on, my daughter walked into our bedroom to ask my wife a question and saw the crystal and assumed that my wife was meditating or something, since she'd never seen the crystal before. I was feeling increasingly creeped out, but the next day I began to consider it might be possible that this crystal had been provided to me. I've been going through a lot and working on my depression. Could this be? Has anyone heard of this kind of thing happening? You know, where an object just appears in your home. I want to feel good about this, but it still makes me feel uneasy if I think about it too long. Bonus file written by Jimmy Peglegs, discovering the eerie secrets of a medieval Tudor hall. Hello, I'm lucky enough to work in a Tudor hall in the UK. The building is late 14th century, although much of it is late 16th century and later. It's timber framed, and the electrics are in dire need of redoing, so it is a creaky and poorly lit old pile. Places like this tend to accumulate spooky stories, and the hall is no exception, with 2 old legends in particular. There have been loads of sightings around the place that have been reported by both staff and visitors. In the 7 years I've been there, I've been collecting these stories and we've made a ghost tour from them. I'm somewhat of a skeptic, but I've had 3 experiences that I can't really explain. The first came in the summer of 2018. It was still bright out, so the hall wasn't too dark. I was closing the first floor of the house up on my own. I reached the room where a lot of the sightings were centered. Off to the side is a bedroom with a large oak door. I had my back to the main room whilst trying to close the door, as the bolt was jammed. As I was doing this, a massive crash happened right behind me. I spun around in alarm, expecting to see the suit of armor on the floor, but the room was deathly still. I could still feel the vibrations through the doorknob. Needless to say, I was freaked out and left. The second experience was quite fleeting, but I'm sure of what I saw. Again, at the end of the day, about 6 months after the first experience, in the service wing, there's a large Victorian kitchen, and just outside its door is a small staircase leading up to the servants' quarters and a guest wing. I was heading into the kitchen to turn the lights off, but I looked up at the stairs as I passed and I saw someone in a long white dress pass across the top. It took me a moment as we had other staff in, but I realized that the last visitors had just left. Thinking we'd missed someone, I went up the stairs and searched for this visitor. I looked through several rooms, but there was no one there. Needless to say, it's a spooky old place and many of the staff don't like being there on their own. This is the third story. I was closing the house up in December last year. The house had been decorated for Christmas, and I was showing a new starter which doors to lock and where the lights are. I went into one of the rooms on the ground floor and turned the lights out before noticing that one of the decoration lights were still on. I walked up to the table and switched them off. My new colleague was standing in the doorway behind me. This is 5 p.m. in December, so it's dark. About 2 seconds after turning the fairy lights on the decoration off, something sizable drops to the floor in the fireplace. Another second later, something lands behind me as if it was thrown by someone. We were both startled, so my colleague switched the lights on and we looked for whatever had made the noise, but everything was in its place. It was very disconcerting, and no one could explain it. Case file number 1057, written by Ariolet. The Mystery of the Shape-Shifting Vacuum. Today, while visiting my mom, I offered to help her around the house while she worked in the garden. I began vacuuming her kitchen with her new vacuum cleaner that I hadn't used before. I looked at the settings to be sure I had it all right before I turned it on, and I moved to switch to hard floor, which was the third setting, but didn't pay attention to the other two settings since this is what I was looking for. When I got to her rugs, I looked at the switch to switch it from hard floor to a more appropriate setting, and this time, the vacuum read something along the lines of carpet or rug for the first setting. Then there was a symbol with a line at the bottom and small lines coming off the top of that line for the second setting, and a hard floor for the third setting. I immediately thought it was weird that the second setting had a drawing or a symbol when the other two had words. I switched it to the third setting and vacuumed the rugs. As I was working on this, my mom walked back through the house and I asked what the second setting was for. I assumed it was for a very short carpet, but was just checking, and she confirmed this. After the rugs, I looked down to switch it back to the hard floor setting, and now the second setting had words indicating short carpet instead of a symbol. I just paused and looked at it for a moment, because it was completely different from what I was positive I saw just a few minutes before. I know it's a small glitch, but I'm positive the first time I looked, it was a symbol and drawing, but every time I checked after that, it was in writing. Bonus file, written by Charles H.S. Prockett. When the Wild Turns Against You, a Hiker's Nightmare. Several years ago, a friend and I went on a multi-day hiking trip during winter. While preparing for the trip, I found a forum dedicated to the trail we'd been hiking and several threads about people going missing on it. Most of the members blamed the hikers themselves, saying they were most likely inexperienced, would-be adventurers who had gone off trail and gotten lost. There was one old man on the forum who claimed he'd completed the trail once a year for the past 50 or so years, and he believed there was something more sinister behind these disappearances. Naturally, the other members laughed at him. We set off before sunrise to get as many miles in as possible on the first day. That entire day, we only met one other person, a friendly, middle-aged man who lived somewhat locally. He seemed impressed that we were taking on the trail in winter, and even invited us to camp near his property, but we declined and pressed on. That night, we were surprised by some pretty dangerous terrain around the edge of a lake and took the decision to sleep in our bivy sacks under an overhanging rock. Not exactly ideal camping conditions, but given the potential hazards, we felt this was the smartest choice. I don't sleep well at the best of times in a bivy sack, and if you've ever been zipped into one, you'll know how claustrophobic it can feel. The rock hanging over my head didn't help either. A few hours after I did eventually manage to fall asleep, I woke suddenly to the sound of my friend shouting and swearing at me. I popped my head out of my bivy sack and saw that he was still zipped inside his. He had somehow gotten off the relatively level ground we had been sleeping on and was slowly sliding down towards the lake. I quickly got up and dragged him, with great effort, back up to ground level. He was absolutely furious with me, claiming that he'd felt me drag him, but soon calmed down and accepted that he'd most likely rolled over repeatedly in his sleep. We didn't go back to sleep, and instead had some coffee and breakfast while waiting for the sun to come up. When we set off, it started to rain heavily and didn't stop for most of the day. I was also having some trouble with an old injury in my leg, which slowed us down considerably. The sun seemed to disappear rather suddenly near the top of a deceptively steep hill, so we set up camp there and then, this time in a tent. After the rough couple of days we had, we were grateful to be inside a tent, and the ground underneath us was actually not too bad. We talked and joked about the trip so far, and for some reason I remember my friend expressing his disappointment that he'd forgotten to pack his iPad, and then we tried to sleep. Soon after, I began to hear what sounded like human footsteps. I thought to myself, surely there isn't someone else out here climbing this hill at night. The sound continued, and the more intently I listened, the more I became certain of what I was hearing. I poked my head out of the tent, and the sound stopped. I got out to pee and looked around, not a soul in sight. Shortly after getting back into my sleeping bag, the footsteps started again, and this time they started circling our tent. By this point I was pretty frightened, and asked my friend, "Are you hearing this?" He responded, "Yes, I fucking am." Knowing that he'd been hearing them the entire time and sounded as freaked out as I did, genuinely terrified me. We got out of the tent again and asked if anyone was there, but again, there was no one around and the sound had stopped instantly. The footsteps around the tent continued for quite some time, and we didn't sleep. As soon as the sun came up, we packed up our things, got off the trail and hiked to the nearest village, got a cab to the nearest town, and made our way home. We have never been able to find a convincing explanation of what could have been causing the sound of the footsteps that night, and my friend has since become a full-fledged missing person, paranormal, and conspiracy enthusiast. Case file number 1058, written by Independent.63, crashing into the multiverse twice. Long story short, I was in a mild car crash yesterday. I got rear-ended at a stoplight in rainy, slippery conditions. I banged up my leg pretty hard, and the back of my car was smashed in. Did a police report, filed a claim. All good, all done. Today, I walk out to my car, and it's as good as new. 0 dents, not even a scratch. No evidence of the crash. I swear, I'm just a normal person, no hallucinations ever before, and I have no explanation. I stood there staring at it for like half an hour, touching the surface, trying to figure out how. Did I quantum jump? A glitch in the Matrix? Magic? Did I die in the crash and now live in some alternate reality, Final Destination style? How does a metal unbend itself overnight? And here's the real gut punch. It happened again a few days later, but this time it really stuck. The damage and all didn't go away. The first event kind of prepared me mentally for the second one, but none of this makes sense. Case file number 1059, written by As You Hear the Birds. From Depression to Joy, my Ayers Rock encounter. I used to live and work at Ayers Rock. I had been struggling with depression for quite a while, and one day, as I was crossing some sand dunes with groceries, I began to feel like I had enough. I wanted out, and I figured I'd do it when I got home. It was at this point that I noticed something pretty big coming towards me. I looked up to see what it was, but didn't see or hear anything unusual. Nevertheless, I sensed that whatever it was expanded even larger and larger as it grew nearer, and I felt my whole body begin to vibrate. It was like being in a really heavy storm or something, because this thing was immense and powerful. At first I thought I was in the way and was going to be annihilated, but somehow realized that this whatever it was going to pass me. I then had an extremely strong feeling that it had noticed me and briefly glanced in my direction. A feeling of overwhelming love and compassion, with a hint of teasing humor, like I was some silly little kid, washed over me, and a word boomed in my head: breathe. So I did. I breathed in as deep as I could and felt months and months of sadness and loneliness and self-loathing simply and immediately replaced with a pure feeling of joy. I was weightless. I was happy. Nothing else mattered. And as I stood there, the whatever it was strode past me on its way to something I somehow knew was really important, leaving me with tears streaming down my face and all my groceries spilled in the sand. Creepy File number 87, written by Mesacasa 1. The Curious Case of the Blue SUV, a mysterious road trip story. This weekend, I went through the weirdest road trip of my life. So, for a bit of context, I work with my mom, and we fairly often go on long road trips for work. This weekend, we were coming back from a business fair about 14 hours away from where we live. After about 1 hour on the road, I noticed a blue SUV towing 2 bikes in front of me. I remember it stood out for me because the bikes were really nice ones. Eventually, this car overtook a truck and it got away from us. After about 2 more hours, I noticed the car overtaking us, and it just happens to be the same blue SUV with the bikes from before. I even remember my mom asking if we had seen this car before and me answering, yeah, he probably stopped for gas or something and we passed him. The thing is, along the next 4 hours, this happened at least 2 more times, even though we had stopped ourselves. At this point, I was already thinking it was weird, but maybe that this guy must take a lot of P-stops and likes to make back time by speeding? We were about 8 hours in when we got to a point where the road was completely blocked by other cars that had stopped. We assumed that there was some sort of accident in the road ahead, and that had stopped traffic. I didn't have the internet to check, but I could still see a map of the area on my phone, so I started to check for alternate roads while my mom left the car to talk to the other drivers. I found that there was an exit from the main road about 200 meters from where we were, and that I could use it to go through an alternate road that would take me back to the main one about 5 kilometers ahead. Mom got the same information from a truck driver who said it was a very narrow dirt road, too thin for his truck, but we could probably go through it and skip the accident. She also found out it had been a pretty bad one, and that they probably would take a few hours to unblock the road. Knowing this, we decided to drive through the side of the road to the exit and try to find this alternate path. We also switched seats since I'm better with maps, so my mom was driving. It was already pretty dark at this point, but we had no problem finding this road. The thing is, it was a really bad dirt path, so we had to go pretty slow. We even reached a small wooden bridge that I had to leave the car to check if it was still stable, and it was totally deserted. A bit later, we reached a split in the road, and I looked back at the map to see which way to take. I found out we should go left, but after taking a second look at the map, I noticed something that made me even more creeped out than I already was. The river we had just crossed was called Rio de Mortes, which is Portuguese for River of the Deaths, and it encountered the main road at the point we estimated the accident to be. I decided not to say anything, and we continued to follow the path until we got back to the main road, where we switched seats again. At this point, the main road was deserted as well, probably because every single car going in this direction had stopped at the block in the road. After a short while, we start seeing a few ambulances go by in the opposite direction every now and then, which looked normal at first, but it eventually was looking like we had seen too many of them for a single accident. They also looked exactly the same, but that is what you expect from ambulances. The main road was also very dark at this point, and it went on without stopping for much longer than we remembered from our way to the business fair. Eventually, a car starts to approach behind me, and after a little while, it overtakes us, and to make things even weirder, it just happened to be the exact same blue SUV with the bikes. We eventually pass by a big city, and I suggest we should enter it to eat something a little nicer, even though it would make the trip longer, and Mom agrees. All the weird stuff stopped happening after that, but I tried to Google the accident when we stopped to eat, and again in the day later at home, and couldn't find anything about it, which is pretty weird as well. It was a major accident. Case file number 1060, written by Scarcity Upper 2939. When the universe helps you ace an exam. Some time ago, I had to take a pretty important exam in a different school, with teachers I never met before. The curriculum was given, but we all had to pull a paper, and the one we got was our topic for the exam. There I was, second in line, when I heard a voice. Pull the first one. I instantly froze on the spot, trying to put up a nothing is wrong at all poker face. I thought back, what? Pull the first one. But why? Pull it. Okay, I'm doing it. So as soon as I could, I went and grabbed the first paper and stood there in full surprise. This was an advanced level exam, but this question was super easy. Like I felt I'm having a pleasant chat and not an important exam. I had no idea this was even part of this curriculum and did an effortless 100%. So no idea what happened there, and it was a one-time occasion, but damn was I happy to have listened to that voice. Case file number 1061, written by Tanya Hylian. The night I stepped into a different bathroom dimension. Last winter, I, 27 female, went on vacation with my mom to a small town in the middle of a huge ecological park, consisting of kilometers upon kilometers of desert. It wasn't our first time visiting there. We just love how calm and quiet it is, the beautiful scenery, and the kind people who live in that town. Since it's a very small town, there's only one hotel with 5 rooms and 3 bathrooms. 2 of the 3 bathrooms are inside the restaurant that's attached to the hotel, and to get to them from any of the rooms, you have to pass through various sets of doors. Because of this, at night, we only used the other bathroom, which was a metal door on the other side of a small patio. I remember that on the first day at the hotel, I went to the bathroom, and when I tried to close the door, I couldn't close it fully because there was a crack on the wall the door was attached to. There had been an earthquake a few years prior, which was probably the culprit for this crack since the last time we'd stayed at that hotel, many years ago, it wasn't there. As a result, we had to tie a string from the lock to a nail in a wall inside the bathroom to close it, and even then it never fully closed. It annoyed me, but we weren't paying much, and we were the only ones staying at the hotel anyways. Now here's how the glitch happened. It was our 3rd day staying at the hotel, and we had just come back from a walk up a nearby mountain. Very small, the walk barely lasted an hour. It was still fairly early at night, around 10 p.m., and my mom said she was going to get ready for bed. I told her to go ahead because I wanted to stargaze for a little while, taking advantage of the cloudless sky. I did so for about half an hour or so, before deciding it was time to get ready for bed as well. I went to our room, got my toothbrush and toothpaste, and then went to the bathroom. As soon as I stepped inside, everything felt off. I reached for the light switch, but it wasn't there. I searched for it to no avail, and then, when my eyes got used to the darkness, I saw it was on the opposite wall, the one that had a crack. Except when I turned on the light, I realized there was no crack. As such, I was able to close the door perfectly, and there was no string or nail to tie it in place. It was as if it was an entirely different bathroom, but everything else was the same. The tiles on the walls, the slightly rusted mirror, the cheap-looking head shower, the white sink with the pink soap. Everything was the same as I remembered except for the cracked wall and the light switch. It was as if, for the time I took to wash my teeth, I was in an alternate timeline in which the earthquake didn't happen, the wall didn't crack, and the light switch wasn't moved to another wall. It was a very surreal experience, and the more I stayed there, the more nervous I became, so I hurried up, turned off the light, and pretty much sprinted towards my room. My mom was already asleep, so I decided not to bother her, but it took a while before I could sleep because I was feeling very unnerved. The next day, with the sun now illuminating everything, I went back to check on the bathroom that had scared me so much the previous night, but it was exactly as it should be, crack and all. Creepy file number 88, written by Jesse B21, A Dog's Intuition, How My Pomeranian Detected a Threat. This was in 2011, a year after I'd, female 22 at the time, graduated college. I was living in my first apartment with a friend. I had adopted the sweetest dog I'd ever had, a runt of the litter Pomeranian who literally loved every person she ever met. My nephew was young at the time and would sometimes handle her a little roughly. Sweet kid, and we'd correct him. But he didn't quite realize how little she was under all that fur, and she tolerated it without ever nipping or anything. One day, my roommate was gone and there was a knock at the door. It was a handyman who said he was there for an annual check on appliances. He was wearing the apartment complex's standard uniform and had a badge, so I didn't even really think twice about it. And upon follow-up, he really did work there, even though I hadn't been notified this would be happening. He comes in and begins chatting and sort of leering. Felt uncomfortable, but not nearly as freaked out as when my dog came rushing in between us, ears back, teeth bared, and started growling at him. He kind of awkwardly laughed and went to pet her. A weird choice for a dog that is baring its teeth at you. And she immediately lunged forward like she was going to bite him. He leapt back before she could. Tiny dog, large man, but he was obviously freaked out. At this point, she is straight up barking at him. He asked if I could put her away while he worked, and I lied and said she had separation anxiety, so I recommended he'd come back another time when I could walk her, or when my roommate was there so one of us could be in a room with her. He never did come back. My dog lived another 7 years, and not once did she ever growl at another human, let alone try to bite one. You hear about dogs being able to read people, so I don't know if he would have done anything to me while on company hours. I still think she could sense he wasn't a good person. She was my good girl. Case file number 1062, written by Anonymous. I witnessed a kart teleport at 50 miles an hour. This happened last year, and is quite easily the most insane thing that I have ever experienced in my life, besides a certain trip when I was 20. I am now 25. I work at an international racetrack just north of Pittsburgh. We have a nationally renowned karting track, and a huge racing organization was there for the weekend doing a national title race, USPKS. I was actually off that weekend, and the karting director called me at like 6:30 that morning on Saturday and asked me if I could pick up a shift because someone called off. So I did, and I came in to work the track as a flagger. I never worked for the karting, really. I'm the race control for the road course, so I know how to use the flags and rules, etc. I'm on a sheltered wooden platform near the back of the track in turn 12. Got my radio on me and my flags, race is going on, and I'm just hanging out watching karts fly by me at like 50 miles per hour, making sure no one gets flucked up or goes off the track. I see a kart coming out of turn 11. It's a slight right-hand bend, and then goes 500 feet into turn 12, which is a mean right-hand turn. My platform is directly in between these two turns, and off the track another 50 feet, so if I'm staring straight, I can easily see the section of track from 11 to 12. As soon as a kart comes out of 11, maybe another 50 feet, it literally skipped to turn 12. It teleported. There was no linear movement or increase in speed. I did not blink or close my eyes. It was at 11, and then suddenly 12. Even if I did blink, there is absolutely no way the kart itself was moving fast enough to cover that amount of distance in the time my eyes would have been closed. What's even more flucked up, and also backs up if I did happen to blink, is that the sound of the kart teleported as well. I started to faintly hear it come up to 11, and then it was a distinct engine braking of a two-stroke when it came to 12 to brake hard and take the turn in a matter of a mere millionth of a fraction of a second. I couldn't believe what happened, and my heart felt like it literally stopped, and it almost triggered a full-blown panic attack. I have moderate anxiety. I couldn't stop thinking about what the fuck just happened. I didn't tell anyone, no one would have believed me, and I still have never told anyone this before because it just seems so outlandish and unbelievable. I know what I've seen, and the kart absolutely went through some sort of time and space warp, or I don't even fucking know. I really don't. And I'm very glad other people have seen weird crap like this too. FYI, no drugs, alcohol, sleep deprivation, heat exhaustion, nothing. I was 100% conscious and clear-minded when this happened. I have seen hundreds of thousands of laps completed, and this has never ever happened once. Case file number 1063, written by Fanfiction Music Lover. The mystery of the chocolate plaque that fell from the sky. I'm in Turin, Torino, Italy, with an Erasmus exchange program, and yesterday, as I was on the escalator exiting the metro station in the Dante stop, and there was a man before me, his bag and jacket closed. He was about 2 steps away from me. As we approached the end of the escalator, suddenly a chocolate plaque fell out of nowhere, missing my head for a few inches. I was shocked. I instantly thought that the man before me had somehow lost it, and I grabbed it and ran to him to give it back. Thank God the guy spoke English, and he said that he hadn't lost the chocolate plaque and joked that it was a present for me by God or the universe. We both looked up and around us to make sure that someone wasn't looking for the chocolate, and then we parted ways laughing at this odd incident. I returned to my hotel room exhausted because of a long day and baffled by the chocolate, and I shared the incident with my roommate. She couldn't believe it either. We opened the chocolate, and as we ate it, I realized it had berries in it, which I'm allergic to. I rushed to get my anti-allergy pills and then timed my reaction just in case I needed medical attention. My roommate is studying the package, and she realizes that the chocolate has expired in October of 2022. Shocked once more, I'm left wondering how that chocolate plaque fell from the sky. No one was out on the balconies around the area, and no one was looking for it. I'm just at a loss for a logical explanation. Bonus file, written by Rafi Raya. My terrifying encounter with a shadow dog. This morning, I woke up at my usual time, 5 a.m., to go to the gym before classes. I am off campus, staying with my parents. However, they are away for a month, so I've had the house to myself. Well, anyways, every morning I wake up, let my dog out to go do his business, shower and brush my teeth, let him back inside before I get dressed and leave. This morning, I woke up feeling a little weird. The house had a strange energy, and my gut sensed that something was up. I let my dog out into our pitch-black backyard. The deck light didn't turn on like it usually does, which is unusual, but I thought nothing of it and went to get a shower. After my shower, I went back to the sliding glass door to put my dog in, and I could see him sitting there waiting for me. I opened the door and watched him, a large black lab, walk in and under a table. I then proceeded to close the door and walk to my room to get dressed. Here's where it gets weird. As I was leaving the area where the back door is, I felt that same strange feeling that I had been feeling all morning. I decided to look at the dog's bed and noticed he wasn't in it. So I looked back at the door and saw, to my utter confusion, that he was still sitting outside. My stomach instantly dropped. I could have sworn on my life that I watched him come in the house and under a table. I walked back to the door, let my actual dog inside, and instantly searched for my house to see if another animal came inside instead. I didn't find anything. As I thought more about it, the thing I let in before looked more like a shadow rather than a dog, and it moved differently, although it was around the same size. I called my girlfriend to tell her about it, as she was waiting for me at the gym, and she said it was probably just my imagination. But I have never ever imagined something this real. I wasn't even tired. I noticed that my dog was acting a little strange too, staring at one of our walls and growling quietly. I left soon after that and got on with my day. I am at a loss. If anyone has a possible explanation to ease my nerves, because I'm really dreading sleeping there alone tonight, I'd love to hear it.
Case notes are file 1055. The scary glitch tale of the time warp gas station. So falling asleep at the gas station and then dreaming you drove for 2.5 hours, this is a possibility. We do know that people can have very lucid dreams, and sometimes it can be hard to distinguish what is real and what is a dream. I mean, that's a common trope in many science fiction, or even philosophy. It's kind of a horror setting for me. Back to TNG, where Riker is imprisoned in this alien camp, and he doesn't understand if it's because he keeps zipping between the camp or the prison colony and then back on the ship. And every time, everything seems like it makes sense, but he doesn't know what's real and what's fake. So messing with your mind, even if it's your own mind doing it, is unsettling, for sure. Or you have the inner light. Man, TNG is just making all the references this week. It's kind of ironic, though, that I'm creeped out by the idea that reality isn't real, but I love the idea of simulation theory. So, I don't know what's going on in my mind there to square that circle, but something is happening. I don't know, maybe it's because it's just so high level that everything is a simulation, and then we wake up and it's the real world. But we chose, maybe it's because we chose to be in the simulation. I think that's what's going on. It's like load your own adventure, choose your own adventure. For the story though, in this particular case, if it was a glitch, it fits the parameters of a space-time anomaly or portal. So in those cases, you're just driving along and you zip ahead or zip back, and I could see that happening. It can affect time itself too. So it's almost like a reset. Although in this case, it's not a time anomaly because you mentioned the gas. You did actually drive. You just were zipped back, which is freaky indeed. I wonder what your GPS history data would show. That's an interesting thing to check. See if it shows that you just teleported back. That would be weird. Case notes are file 1056. Is this a sign from the universe in a crystal miracle? So this reminds me of that strange red ball, the story where there was just a random red ball in a mostly empty basement that was smooth, no other entrances, no reason for a red ball to appear in the basement area, but it just was there. There's no rational explanation that they could come up with. Kind of just like this, there's no reason for this quartz crystal to be in your home, but it was. I think it's far more of a fascinating glitch than just duplication or disappearance, because it's not supposed to be there at all. It's like the universe is not just mistakenly rendering or de-rendering an object, but losing track of who it even belongs to. So in a different universe, someone who does have the crystal probably lost it, or maybe even from this universe, because it is just not yours. So it could just have vanished and come to you for some reason. The universe all wonky. Definitely wonky. Case notes for the bonus file. Discovering the eerie secrets of a medieval Tudor hall. You know, the more I read and think about spirit stories, the more my impression is that the vast bulk of these lingering fragments of sentience are just lonely. They're trying desperately to communicate or interact with us, but it's very difficult to do. They're sort of stuck in a limbo. The perpetual spectator of the game, unable to interact in any meaningful way with the living. The only hope for them is eventually their energy depletes and they fade away. It's only a small fragment anyways. The bulk of consciousness is transposed to a different universe via quantum immortality if they're dead. How much of it is still conscious, what is left behind? Is it just an imprint, almost like just executable code that doesn't have any sentience? Just operating along the lines of whoever was passed away, but not really self-aware. I hope it's the latter, because if not, it's kinda sad, isn't it? And now time for the quote of the day. If you look long enough and hard enough, you can find something to hate about anyone. However, the opposite is also true. Sort of like steel manning versus straw manning an opinion, but for an entire person. So you can try to view your, not opponents, the person you disagree with, his opinions, in either the best light possible, the steel man, or the worst light possible, the straw man, or just concoct an entirely different opinion or construct of what they actually believe. It's easier to attack something absurd that you make up about them, or about their worldview, rather than what they actually think. It's hard to square that, for sure. None of this is easy. These quotes of the day, I think, are meant to instill, thought processes in people, but don't mean that I'm perfect or anyone else is perfect. They're just thought experiments. And maybe they help you to improve yourself just a little bit, here and there. A good way to start with that, indeed, is just to try to think the best of people, unless absolute evidence is provided that they aren't good people. Yeah, fair enough, I'd say. Case notes are file 1057. The mystery of the shape-shifting vacuum. So those tiny little anomalies that you can almost just brush off, almost, as a malfunction of your own mind and perception, they're what breaks the multiverse's proverbial camel's back. It's truly like the universe is gaslighting us. Intentionally or not, that's the real question. I think if it is intentional, in these small cases, it's just as pranks. I don't think it's malicious. It doesn't seem harsh enough to be malicious. No, it's too much like what I would do. Case notes for the bonus file. When the wild turns against you, a hiker's nightmare. So I wonder if that man, the middle-aged man you met on the trail, was even real. For some reason, my impression is that he was wandering the path and didn't actually own a house. Maybe he did in the past, but it wasn't really his. If you had camped in that area, the actual real owner may have come out and asked, what are you doing? The guy you're talking about doesn't live or hasn't lived here for maybe decades or something. That'd be my guess. So yeah, just in a nutshell, I think it was a spirit that was lonely and looking for company on the trail, the only path that he knows and can travel. It is seriously sad in many ways to consider that spirits are just these entities that are trapped behind consciousness, pockets of consciousness that want to move on but can't, not yet. I think they will eventually. I think the energy dissipates, so it's not all bad. But in the meanwhile, they're probably just bored. I wonder if their perception of time is as linear as us, or at least as consistent. Every single second we experience. It's all time is relative in perception too. If you're having fun, it seems to go by much faster than if you're bored. So hopefully they're only aware of small pockets, and then eventually they just fade away. That'd be better. And now time for the quote of the day. Every man dies, but not every man really lives. William Wallace. Freedom! You have to draw your own lines in life. You can't be living by someone else's standards and principles. You have to know what actually makes sense to you. And then, to truly live, you have to embrace those values and be consistent with them. Not the easiest thing to do, but give it a shot. We all have to. Case notes for file 1058, crashing into the multiverse twice. So it is possible that the first event was a premonition, a kind of vision of what would come to pass. Though I'd have to side more with quantum immortality given how you describe the damage to your leg. Major arteries are within the leg, so near the thigh, even towards your calf area, there's major arteries, like highways for blood, that traverse there, and if it's severed, even internally, you'll just bleed out from inside. You may not even necessarily know anything is wrong, you'll just feel tired and eventually pass away. The fact it happened again, however, that's just wild. If you're in a new universe, remember, it's the same time coordinates relative to other universes, so it just means to say that everything is running concurrently, as we understand it. So if you traverse to a new universe in quantum immortality, you're still in the same date and time. Sometimes there's like tiny rewinds or fast forwards to square the circle, but this wouldn't relate to having an accident a few days later, 3 days later. So it seems like somehow in this other universe, it's quite different, and you had an accident that somehow played out. I mean, the amount of things that have to go wrong for an accident to happen. So if that is the case, you're just in a universe that is that different, then you should notice all kinds of weird anomalies all the time. Like, people's personalities are different, maybe your friend is, maybe you have different friends. But, different paint colors on walls or just anomalies, the credit cards in your wallet are different, even bank passwords. That's something that you don't think about a lot, but if you're in a new universe and the other you that was there may not have chosen the same password, so you're kind of out of luck in those cases, right? If you can't change the password, that would be annoying. Maybe sometimes when you think you forgot a password, you actually didn't. You're just remembering a different universe's password. Just a random thought there. Case notes for file 1059. From depression to joy. My Ayers rock encounter. What a moving and full experience this must have been for you. Just incredible. I know a lot of people feel down and depressed lately, especially in the recent years with everything that happened. I do wonder how people are picked for this kind of help. If it's willed external, like a guardian angel, spiritual, or just from the simulation, it's not random. So I have to think it's related to the person, but why would some people deserve, or is it even related to deserving? It's just something that has to happen for that person, for everything else to play out as it needs to. Maybe instead of that, maybe it's your own will, screaming back into the past because you're in a negative future and you want to avoid that buffered reality, so you're choosing something different this time. And to do that, you have to scream back at your past. Almost like a spiritual, ghostly echo, screaming back, don't do it. But not in those words, just as a feeling instead. No, Dave? No. Don't do it, Dave. Case notes for the creepy file number 87. The Curious Case of the Blue SUV, a weird road trip story. So you may have been stuck in an entirely transient multiverse crossing point, which has a lot of symmetry with the rickety old bridge you had to cross over too, but I don't think that's necessarily related, although it's very weird that the accident happened crossing into the point where the river would cross over, and it's called, Rio de Mortes, that's River of Deaths. I guess it fits the name. The river's trying to live up to its reputation. You know what I kind of miss? Those road trips in the past where you had to use an actual map, like unfolding the giant map and figuring out where you are in relation to everything. Very old school, I guess. But yeah, it's better to have pocket GPS on your phone. Much more practical, of course, but I don't know. I still miss it. Finding your way. More of an adventure, it feels like, I think. You can still do it, I guess. And now time for the quote of the day. Life is not the amount of breaths you take. It's the moments that take your breath away. Alex Hitchens. Yeah, this reminds me of the oatmeal analogy, that life is like a bowl of oatmeal. Most of it is somewhat bland, it's still nutritional and important, but really you want those raisins. Or bananas if you had bananas like I do to oatmeal. Or those pockets of brown sugar or maple syrup. Those are the fun times. But to appreciate the fun times, you have to have the mundane times as well. Not necessarily negative, but just a baseline. If your baseline is awesome all the time, I mean, I guess that's okay, but you won't appreciate it as much as if you have a baseline of just oatmeal. Case notes for the file 1060, when the universe helps you ace an exam. So was this information given to you by a higher level function of the universe itself, and then just decoded in your subconscious and then passed down to the conscious element via a voice in the head? That's how your brain interpreted and presented it to you, the conscious, you? Or is it some other entity present that knew you'd find an easy and guided answer if you just went with the first page? Why would they care? Was it some spirit that knew you? I think that's less likely. I think it's much more likely that the universe itself, or some higher level moderator, is probably the best word to use, wanted you to succeed. For whatever reason. I don't know what you were studying, but maybe it was important that you passed. That's my guess. So I'll swing with the former. Case notes for file 1061. The night I stepped into a different bathroom dimension. So I'll call this multiversal visitation. More than just peering, as you touched the wall in this parallel reality, you felt the differences, the cracks and all of that, and the lack of a nail. Is there a force that flows through the universe that when you cross it or interact with it, enables this kind of sightseeing or temporary crossover? And it was an actual crossover because you touched everything in the bathroom and used the bathroom itself. Thing is, it has to be bound with the planet itself. This force or portal, whatever you want to call it, because the planet is orbiting our sun, which is also orbiting the center of our galaxy, which itself is also in movement related to the local cluster, other galaxies, and so on. So, absolute movement, in terms of space-time coordinates, one to the next, we're moving so fast and it's such an, predictable but crazy pattern. We're never in the same space-time coordinates ever again. And given that, whatever is affecting this has to be bound to us, to the planet. So it's bound by gravity, whatever it is, or it's literally implanted within the space-time fabric. The only other possibility is that these things are peppered all throughout the universe, and we're just crossing into them sometimes, and then they just happen to cross in that exact moment, in that thin little crust layer on the planet's surface where we are, and then that's how this happens. They must be everywhere, though, if that's the case, because space is insanely huge, as most people know now. Case notes for the creepy file number 88. A dog's intuition. How my Pomeranian detected a threat. So dogs, cats too, as much as I hate to admit it, do have a strong sense of a person. Is it just raw intuition on their part, or an ability to sense our aura, so to speak? And does our aura reflect our actions and intent? It's rather fascinating to think about, the notion that we're surrounded by an invisible field of energy that represents good and evil. Kind of like in Harry Potter, where the Death Eaters are all in black and the Order members are in white. So I think a bit on the nose in that, but along those lines, I guess. Also, I did work at a Humane Society kennel over a decade ago down in Florida the first time I went there. And let me tell you, those tiny little dogs, the Chihuahuas especially, they are the fiercest. I guess they have something to prove. And now time for the quote of the day. Nobody's gonna hit you as hard as life. But it ain't how hard you can hit. It's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. It's how much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Perseverance. Rocky Balboa, of course. Love this quote. Love the movie. It's all about realizing that you're gonna get hit. You're gonna take damage. There's gonna be pain. But that's okay. No pain, no gain, as they say, right? So take the pain. Get back up, dust yourself off, get knocked out again, and then just keep doing it until eventually you succeed, because you will eventually. Case notes for file 1062. I witnessed a kart teleport at 50 miles an hour. So I'm very curious exactly what the racer in the kart saw and felt. The distance wasn't so great that it's inexcusable from their perspective, they were moving so fast. For instance, they could just think, oh, so much adrenaline, my mind literally just didn't process a few seconds, and now I'm all the way up here. In a high-octane race like that, I could see it happening. Another case of space-time warping, but more curious, only affecting one racer. If it's location-dependent, why didn't all the other karts also experience the same thing? Just that one person crossing the space-time portal, but it only affected him, so it just vanished? Maybe they're unstable, and they vanish after. I guess that would be my guess, that they're unstable. If crossed once, then they vanish. Maybe a few times, I don't know. Case file number 1063. The mystery of the chocolate plaque that fell from the sky. So I can literally feel the excitement and energy from you in your writing. I love it. To be fair, I'd be excited as you if random chocolate was falling from the sky. So was this some elaborate assassination plot by allergy? Let's not go there. No, just some sky wizardry. Universe wizardry producing inedible chocolate for you. A cruel torture. Case notes for the bonus file. My terrifying encounter with a shadow dog. So was this a trick of the mind? Shadow on the wall? Sounds more than just a hallucination. I'm reminded of another story where a woman had to let her dog inside too, just before going to bed. Yeah, I think, or waking? No, just because she wanted to go to bed. And then the dog also had a strange vibe about them after, though they never saw any sort of shadow. It just was odd. Was like it was an imposter dog. Is something possessing our pets? Can that even happen? I don't like that idea. Now time for the quote of the day. Some people can't believe in themselves until someone else believes in them first. Sean McGuire. It is hard to believe in yourself, especially with no baseline. If you haven't accomplished enough yet, or even if you have, but sometimes if you're just put down as a child, it can be hard to appreciate your own achievements and your potential. So someone else coming along and saying, yeah, you have potential, or you've done amazing things. Embrace it, and it's okay to take pride in what you've done. I think we diminish pride a bit too much. You don't want to go to hubris, which is just pride on steroids that's undeserved and arrogant. But pride, to be proud of what you've done, that is good. And you have to internalize it and take it with you. It's important. Like the video, subscribe. Kinetic Symphony signing off.